He left his wife, calling her fat and unworthy of his new life. Years later, she returned, not to apologize, but with the deeds to his company. Subscribe to the channel and write where you're watching the video from. Susanna always believed that love was sacrifice. She had grown up in a modest neighborhood, raised by a single mother who taught her that loyalty was the backbone of any relationship. So when she met Andrew, a charming, soft-spoken marketing intern at a conference years ago, she gave him her all. He was the first white man to ever look at her like she mattered, or so she thought. Back then, Andrew had nothing, just ambition in his eyes and holes in his shoes. Susanna, though not wealthy herself, believed in his dreams. She cooked for him, stayed up proofreading his presentations, and lent him what little she had when his bank account hit zero. When he proposed with a simple ring and a borrowed suit, she had no second thoughts. Their marriage had begun in a tiny studio apartment with mismatched furniture and creaky floors. Susanna worked part-time at a local bakery and spent her evenings designing Andrew's pitch decks and helping him prepare for meetings. Her weight had never been a topic until Andrew's fortunes changed. As he climbed the ladder at a rising tech firm, got promoted, and started driving luxury cars, Susanna noticed a shift. He no longer introduced her to colleagues. At company events, he said she preferred to stay home. The distance was slow and subtle at first, a silence here, a sigh there, a half-hearted kiss on the cheek instead of a hug. Then came the comments. "Maybe you should try walking more. It might help with the energy levels. This dress again? It's not really flattering. Just a salad for dinner, Suze. It's lighter." She brushed it off. She always did. Her friends warned her, but she defended him fiercely. "He's just stressed. He's carrying so much," she'd say with conviction, convincing herself more than them. But nothing prepared her for the day everything cracked wide open. It was a Tuesday. She'd come home early from the bakery, arms full of groceries, hoping to surprise Andrew with his favorite lemon pepper chicken and a homemade chocolate cake. He hadn't responded to her messages that morning, but that wasn't new. Still, a small, persistent worry had tugged at her all day. The house was unusually quiet when she stepped inside. Shoes she didn't recognize, red, slender-heeled sandals, were neatly lined next to the door. Susanna's heart pounded as she set down the grocery bags, her instincts screaming. And then she heard it. Laughter. A woman's voice. Coming from the bedroom. She walked down the hallway in a daze, each step heavy and surreal. When she pushed open the door, the scene etched itself into her memory with painful precision. Andrew, shirtless, lounging on their bed with a young, slim, blonde woman straddling his lap. They both froze. The woman scrambled off, wrapping the sheets around herself. Andrew, unfazed, simply looked up at Susanna with no guilt, no fear, just annoyance. "Why are you home so early?" he asked flatly, as if she'd interrupted a work meeting. Susanna's voice trembled. "Who is she? What is this?" He stood up, pulling on his shirt without urgency. "This is what I want now, Susanna. Her name is Chloe. She understands me. She looks like someone I can take to the events I attend. Someone who fits." The last word landed like a slap. "Fits?" Susanna echoed. He sighed as if bored. "Look, I've tried. But let's be real, you've let yourself go. I can't be the only one trying to evolve. This," he gestured vaguely at her body, her face, her being, "isn't what I signed up for." It was as if the floor had vanished beneath her. Years of love, sacrifice, late nights and early mornings, skipped meals to help pay his tuition, all reduced to a judgment on her weight. Her body trembled. She didn't speak. She just stood there as he delivered the final blow. "I've already spoken to my lawyer. The house is in my name. I'll give you some time to pack." She felt her breath catch. "You're throwing me out?" His eyes were devoid of any warmth. "You'll land on your feet. I'm sure you'll figure something out." He turned away then, already returning to the woman in their bed. Susanna didn't remember walking out. She didn't remember packing the small suitcase. She only remembered the rain that began to fall as she stepped into the street, dragging the old wheelie bag behind her. Her mother had warned her that love with conditions was not love at all. But she had believed in Andrew. She had believed that if she gave enough, stayed loyal enough, loved hard enough, he'd never hurt her. But now she saw clearly. He had never loved her, only the comfort she provided when he was nothing. And now that he had something, she was nothing to him. She found a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, the kind that smelled of bleach and broken dreams. She sat on the edge of the stiff mattress, her hands shaking, staring at the peeling wallpaper. Her phone buzzed with a message from Andrew's lawyer, a draft of divorce papers, efficient, cold. The hours bled into each other. She didn't sleep. Her mind kept replaying his words. "You don't fit. Let yourself go. She understands me." She rose at dawn and walked for hours, not knowing where she was going. Her shoes rubbed her feet raw, but she didn't care. She passed a gym. Inside, a woman was lifting weights, sweat gleaming on her arms, muscles flexing with determination. There was something primal about it, something powerful. Susanna paused, watching. The woman wasn't thin, but she was strong, in control. Susanna looked at her own reflection in the window. Puffy eyes, swollen cheeks, clothes that sagged in some places and clung awkwardly in others. She looked broken, but inside, something cracked. Not the kind of crack that signaled collapse, but the kind that precedes a roar. She returned to the motel, her steps more solid now. She opened her laptop and searched for one thing: transformation stories. Hundreds of images flooded the screen. Before and after photos, glowing faces, stories of betrayal and rebirth. Women who had been called too fat, too old, too much, and had risen from the ashes. Susanna didn't want to get him back. She didn't want his apology. What she wanted, what she needed, was to become someone he'd never have the right to speak to again. Someone who could watch him crumble from above. The first thing she did was sell her wedding ring. Pawned for a few $100s, it was enough to buy a bus ticket to a different city and pay for 2 weeks at a women's shelter. There, surrounded by other women with stories carved in bruises and silence, she began to rebuild, slowly, quietly. She signed up for a weight loss support group under a new name. She began walking every morning at sunrise, counting every step as a declaration of war. She replaced soda with water, takeout with greens, excuses with fire. She kept a journal. On the first page, she wrote, "This is where I kill the version of me who begged to be loved." And so she did. Not overnight. Not with ease. But day after day, pound after pound, tear after tear, Susanna buried the woman Andrew had discarded and began to build a queen. By the end of the month, she had lost only a few pounds. But something far greater had shifted. She had lost the fear in her voice, the hesitation in her step, the lie that she needed a man to be enough. On a cold Sunday morning, she stood in front of a mirror in the shelter's hallway. Her body hadn't changed much yet, but her eyes, they burned. Her jawline was tight with purpose. Her hands clenched. That was the day she whispered to herself, "You were right, Andrew. I don't fit." She leaned closer to the mirror. "I'm going to outgrow every piece of your small, shallow world." And she smiled, Not the smile of a woman trying to be liked, but the grin of someone who had already begun to take back her power, one heartbeat at a time. It had been 3 months since Susanna walked away from the life she had built with Andrew. 3 months since she'd last seen the man who told her she was unworthy of standing beside him. The woman who arrived in the new city was no longer a wife, no longer a homemaker, no longer anyone's anchor but her own. She arrived with one suitcase, a heart torn into jagged pieces, and a plan she hadn't yet found the words for. But she had something stronger than a roadmap. She had resolve. The women's shelter, where she found temporary refuge, wasn't luxurious, but it was safe. That, for now, was enough. Her room was small, the mattress thin, and the walls thin enough that she could sometimes hear another woman's sobs or a child's restless whimpers in the night. But within those walls, Susanna found something she hadn't felt in years: community. No one asked who she had been before. They only looked at who she was now and how she carried herself. In the mornings, Susanna joined the others for shared chores. She wiped tables, helped prepare breakfast, and began each day with her shoulders a little more squared, her back a little less bowed. She volunteered to help organize the food pantry and kept a small notebook tucked into her back pocket, where she scribbled grocery lists, calorie counts, and fragments of thoughts that came to her between tasks. The weight of Andrew's betrayal hadn't left her. It clung to her like old smoke, but it no longer suffocated her. Instead, it pushed her forward like a bitter wind at her back, reminding her with every gust that she had survived something designed to break her. And now that she had nothing, she could become anything. Her transformation began not with weights or treadmills, but with silence. Every evening, she sat in the small park across from the shelter and stared at the horizon, letting herself feel everything she had refused to feel for years. The shame of hiding her body. The pain of pretending she was enough for a man who never really saw her. The rage of being discarded like used clothing. At first, it consumed her. She cried until her chest ached, until her lungs felt wrung dry. But over time, the crying gave way to stillness, to a strange, simmering calm. She would get up from the bench, wipe her face, and whisper to herself, "Not yet, but soon." With what little money she had left, she bought a pair of running shoes, cheap and ill-fitting, but hers. Every morning at dawn, before the city stirred, she ran. At first, she could barely manage a block without gasping for breath, her thighs burning, her chest on fire. But she didn't stop. The pain became her fuel, the ache her prayer. She avoided mirrors for the first month. Her body was still soft in all the places Andrew had scorned, still wide in the curves society whispered should be hidden, but she no longer looked at herself through his eyes. She was building something, not for anyone else, not to be beautiful or accepted, but to be invincible. She visited the local library, spending hours poring over books on nutrition, physical transformation, and psychological resilience. She read stories of women who had walked through fire and emerged whole. She watched videos of motivational speeches, took notes on how they spoke, how they moved, how they commanded a room. And she practiced. Every night, in the quiet of her room, she stood before the mirror and repeated lines aloud. At first, her voice wavered. Then it steadied. Then it rang. In her journal, she drafted what she called the Reconstruction Blueprint. It had 3 phases. The first, physical evolution. She would shape her body not to please, but to dominate, her space, her path, her narrative. The second, knowledge. She would learn the language of business, money, power. She would speak fluently in rooms that once mocked her into silence. And the third, strategic revenge. This wasn't about hurting Andrew in the way he had hurt her. It was about eclipsing him so thoroughly that even his shadow would disappear beneath her feet. With her growing confidence, she took a part-time job at a local health food cafe. The hours were long, the pay was meager, but it placed her at the center of a culture she needed to study. The customers were young professionals, entrepreneurs, wellness influencers. She listened. She observed. She served them with grace and cataloged every habit, every trend, every gap in the market they never noticed. One night, while wiping down a table, she overheard two women talking about an upcoming wellness retreat for women in business. The words pierced through her like lightning. She went home and looked it up. It cost more than she could afford, but she applied anyway, submitting a scholarship application that told the story of a woman rebuilding from ashes. 2 weeks later, an email arrived in her inbox. She had been accepted. The retreat was held in a cabin-style lodge tucked in the hills outside the city. It was the first time in over a year that Susanna had left the city limits, and the first time in her life that she found herself among women who spoke freely about ambition, ownership, strategy. They talked about equity and growth, about disruption and digital marketing, about brand architecture. Susanna soaked it all in like sunlight. She didn't speak much during the first 2 days. She was still learning how to unlearn the silence she'd wrapped herself in during her marriage. But on the third day, a speaker asked for volunteers to share their visions. Susanna stood up. Her voice trembled at first, but her eyes were steady. She spoke not of weight loss, but of reclamation. Of building a brand that helped women rise from emotional devastation and reshape their lives from the ground up. She described a platform that offered not just products, but community, coaching, and identity. When she finished, the room was silent. Then came applause, slow at first, then rising. A woman approached her after, handing her a card. "You need to launch this," she said. "When you're ready, I can connect you with funding options." Susanna held the card in her hand that night like it was a spark of divinity. She had come so far already, but this was her moment to ignite. The next morning, she gave her 2 weeks' notice at the cafe. She found a shared workspace downtown and began designing the blueprint for her company. She named it Phoenix Rise. The tagline, "Out of fire, we soar." She built a website from scratch, uploaded her story anonymously, and invited other women to share theirs. Within weeks, the blog had thousands of views. She filmed her first video with a borrowed camera, speaking into the lens with raw honesty. Her face had changed, sharper, more defined, but her eyes held the same fire that first lit in the shelter's hallway mirror. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from women across the country. Some were in shelters. Some were still in abusive homes. Others were silently dying in luxury condos next to men who no longer saw them. Susanna replied to every message. The weight continued to fall. Not dramatically, not overnight, but steadily. More importantly, her spirit grew heavier, with purpose. She invested in a fitness trainer who believed in her mission. He didn't push her to lose weight. He trained her to build strength. Her body hardened. Her voice deepened. Her presence, once timid, became undeniable. On the first anniversary of the day Andrew threw her out, she posted a photo of herself on the Phoenix Rise blog. She didn't smile in it. She didn't pose. She simply stood, arms crossed, eyes forward, the caption reading, "You don't need to burn bridges when you can build your own kingdom." By now, she had moved into a small but elegant apartment. She still lived modestly, pouring every extra dollar into her business. But she no longer feared anything. Not hunger, not loneliness, certainly not him. Late at night, she sometimes wondered if Andrew had seen any of her videos, if he had stumbled upon her name in a blog or business forum, if he had even the faintest clue that the woman he discarded now stood taller than ever. She hoped he hadn't, because she wasn't ready to be seen. Not yet. She still had more to build, more to plan. The final stage of her blueprint, the part she had not yet revealed even to herself, was drawing near. And when it came, she would not merely be healed, she would be dangerous. The city hummed with possibility. From the 13th floor of her modest apartment, Susanna stood barefoot on the cool tiles of her balcony, watching the sunrise smear streaks of gold and crimson across the sky. A year ago, she had stood on a street corner with a single suitcase and a broken heart. Now, her mornings began with ritual and focus. A pot of herbal tea brewed on the stove, 30 minutes of meditation, a journal entry, and her workout. There was discipline in every movement, but none of it came from punishment. It was reverence now, toward herself, her body, and the fire that refused to die even when everything else had. Her body had changed, leaner, sculpted in ways she hadn't thought possible. Her thighs were strong. Her arms could hold weight and strike back. Her waist had narrowed, and her face carried new definition. But more striking than any physical shift was the air around her, an energy that filled rooms before she even spoke. Strangers held doors for her differently now. People at networking events leaned in when she talked. Waiters brought her water with subtle deference. It wasn't beauty they reacted to, it was presence. The Phoenix Rise brand had grown beyond her expectations. What had begun as a blog and a single video had turned into a movement. Susanna now had a small team of women, some of whom had come from shelters like the one where she once stayed, working with her to create courses, write guides, manage online forums, and moderate live discussions. The website offered meal planning templates, guided workouts, and journaling prompts. But what made it different from the thousands of other wellness platforms was the honesty. No curated perfection, no plastic smiles, just real women, real stories, and the belief that pain could be turned into power. And it wasn't just digital. Every Saturday, Susanna hosted in-person gatherings in rented studio spaces where women sat cross-legged on mats, sharing stories and holding each other in silence. The testimonials poured in. Women leaving toxic marriages, quitting soul-crushing jobs, confronting family trauma. One woman, previously suicidal, had tattooed Phoenix on her wrist after finishing the RISE program. Susanna had cried when she saw the photo, and not just because it meant something to someone, but because it meant she had become what she needed when no one else showed up for her. But growth wasn't her only goal. The second phase of her blueprint was knowledge, and she pursued it relentlessly. Susanna enrolled in a business leadership course designed for minority female founders. She studied every evening, absorbing financial terminology, pitch techniques, and marketing analytics. She didn't just want to run a company. She wanted to master the language of capital. She began attending business networking events in the city, dressed in sharply tailored suits, her natural hair styled in regal coils that framed her face like a crown. At one such event, held in a towering glass building filled with venture capitalists and startup dreamers, Susanna was approached by a man in his early 50s with silver hair and thoughtful eyes. His name was Paul Castell, and he had made his fortune investing in women-led wellness brands. "I've heard about Phoenix Rise," he said after her introduction. Your engagement rate is extraordinary. You've built something rare. Authenticity with structure. Have you considered scaling?" Susanna had. In fact, she had plans to launch a physical product line, organic teas, affirmational journals, and weighted robes for trauma-informed self-soothing. But her funds were limited. Castell offered her an initial seed investment and strategic mentorship. They scheduled a meeting the following week, and within a month, a partnership was formed. Susanna retained full creative control, while Castell's team supported distribution and supply chains. Her warehouse launched in a quiet industrial zone on the edge of the city. Within it, hand-packed boxes labeled with her fiery emblem were stacked in columns, ready to be shipped across the country. The flagship tea blend, named Ashes to Ember, became a bestseller within weeks of launch. But Susanna hadn't forgotten her third objective. Her plan wasn't just to succeed. It was to rise so far, so high, that the man who spat on her love would one day choke on her name. She began researching Andrew's business. Quietly, methodically. He had recently launched a health-focused tech startup that offered curated fitness content through a sleek subscription app. The branding was flashy, the models thin and white, the language laced with superficial empowerment slogans. But Susanna knew better. His product was hollow, style without substance, noise without a soul. Through mutual contacts, she discovered his app was struggling with user retention. The concept was decent, but his execution lacked credibility. There was a gap between what women needed and what his product offered. And she was already filling that gap with truth. She didn't strike yet. Instead, she positioned her brand adjacent to his, then began to slowly siphon his audience. Her social media manager began targeting the same demographics. Her podcasts, raw and full of hard-won wisdom, climbed the Apple charts. Influencers, once aligned with Andrew's company, began reaching out to her, drawn to her authenticity. She hired a data analyst to identify the exact market overlap between Phoenix Rise and Andrew's startup. The numbers were clear. Within 3 months, her brand had eaten 18% of his projected audience. Investors were beginning to notice. Still, Susanna wanted more than silent conquest. She wanted confrontation, not out of bitterness, but to look him in the eye when he realized the magnitude of what he'd thrown away. And so she planned her re-entry. The annual Women in Wellness Gala was fast approaching. It was the most prestigious event in the industry, an evening of awards, speeches, and networking among the elite. Susanna had attended the previous year as a volunteer, pouring wine and wiping tables. This year, she was invited as a featured speaker. She remembered walking past the gala entrance 12 months ago in a borrowed dress and heels too tight, watching limousines drop off women whose confidence seemed like something bred in bone. She had dreamed of being one of them, not for vanity, but because she needed to prove to herself that she belonged. And now, she did. Her stylist, a former shelter resident who had reinvented herself as a fashion consultant, helped design a gown for the event. It was midnight black with a slit high up the thigh, fitted to her new silhouette with bold, metallic detailing across the shoulders like armor. She wore it like war paint. When the night came, Susanna walked the carpet with poise, photographers snapping her image as if she were already a legend. Inside the ballroom, chandeliers sparkled above hundreds of guests sipping champagne and exchanging polished compliments. And then she saw him. Andrew stood near the far end of the room, wearing a tailored navy suit, a glass of scotch in one hand and a woman draped over his arm. A new one, younger still, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. There was tension in his jawline, fatigue around his temples. He looked older than his 36 years. He hadn't seen her yet. She stepped into the light. A nearby journalist called out her name for a photo. Andrew turned at the sound and froze. His gaze landed on her face, then dropped slowly over her figure. His expression shifted from confusion to recognition to disbelief. The glass in his hand trembled slightly. Susanna didn't smile. She held his eyes for one heartbeat, then two. And then she turned, offering her hand to Paul Castell, who had just arrived beside her. "Ready?" he asked. "Always," she replied, and they walked toward the stage together. As she stepped into the spotlight to deliver her keynote, Susanna no longer felt nerves. She felt ownership. She told the story of pain and reclamation, not hers specifically, but every woman's. She spoke of rising from betrayal, of the power in starting again, of the myth that our worth is defined by who stays. When the standing ovation roared through the hall, she did not seek Andrew in the crowd. She didn't need to. He had seen her, and now the real reckoning could begin. Susanna left the gala with her head held high, the sound of applause still echoing in her ears long after the doors of the ballroom had closed behind her. The night air was crisp, and as she stepped into the waiting car, the chill kissed her skin through the slit of her gown. Paul Castell, sitting beside her in the back seat, said little on the ride to her hotel, respecting the quiet that followed the intensity of her speech. But when he did speak, his words carried weight. "You changed the tone of the whole evening, Susanna," he said, glancing at her. "They'll be talking about you for weeks." She smiled faintly, looking out the window as the city lights flickered past. That was only the beginning. When she got back to her suite, she didn't take off the gown. Instead, she stood in front of the floor-length mirror, arms folded, and studied the woman staring back. Her eyes were clear, jaw firm, posture regal. There was no trace of the soft, pleading figure who once stood in front of a man begging not to be thrown away. That woman had died. This one had risen from her ashes with a crown of fire. But the transformation wasn't enough. Not yet. Tonight had been the public reckoning, the symbolic moment of arrival. What came next would be the private, strategic destruction of the man who believed she had no worth once her body no longer matched his expectations. She didn't want revenge for the sake of cruelty. She wanted equilibrium, closure. And maybe, somewhere deep inside, a lesson etched into his bones that would never be forgotten. She turned from the mirror, walked to her laptop, and opened the folder labeled simply, Blueprint Phase 3. The first document was a detailed market overlap report her data analyst had compiled. Side by side were two brand identities, Phoenix Rise and RevFit, Andrew's company. The numbers painted a damning picture. Susanna's content retention was higher, engagement doubled his, and most tellingly, her brand was outperforming his in the demographic of millennial women aged 25-40, the same group RevFit had invested most heavily in. Her campaign, Body Reclaimed, had gone viral weeks ago, racking up millions of views, while RevFit's latest initiative flopped with poor feedback for being tone-deaf and disconnected. She had already taken his audience. Now she would take his reputation. The first step was infiltration. Susanna reached out to her strategist, a sharp, quiet woman named Naomi, who had once worked in corporate PR before being fired after a public fallout with a male superior. Naomi had no loyalty to the system and had once said, "I don't burn bridges, I dismantle them and sell the parts." Susanna explained what she needed: access to RevFit's operations from the inside. Not industrial espionage, nothing illegal, but real, documentable proof of what was already crumbling beneath the surface. Naomi contacted a former colleague who was now working under Andrew. Within a week, a young woman named Tara was in place, acting as a personal assistant to one of the RevFit's department heads. Tara began feeding them information, and the picture that formed was worse than Susanna imagined. The company was bleeding talent. High turnover rates, unpaid overtime, toxic leadership practices. Employees were burnt out and afraid to speak. Anonymous reviews on job boards read like warnings carved on cave walls. More than that, Andrew had pushed his tech team to roll out an update to the app that wasn't ready, resulting in bugs and subscription failures that caused a wave of complaints. Instead of owning the failure, he blamed the team publicly, leading to a quiet exodus of 3 senior developers. Susanna's eyes narrowed as she read the reports. It was all there: poor leadership, unstable infrastructure, financial mismanagement. All she needed now was to hold up a mirror to it for the world to see. Naomi drafted a press release disguised as an exposé, centered not on Andrew directly, but on the larger issue of wellness companies failing the very communities they claimed to serve. It included quotes from anonymous employees, screenshots of customer service failures, and statistics from real users who had switched to Phoenix Rise for its more inclusive, trauma-informed approach. The article was submitted to a well-known digital media outlet under the byline of a journalist sympathetic to Susanna's mission. The article dropped on a Monday morning. By noon, it was trending on Twitter. By afternoon, RevFit's app ratings plummeted as users left scathing reviews. By the end of the day, one of Andrew's major investors released a statement. "We are reevaluating our involvement with RevFit in light of recent revelations and the growing concern around ethical leadership." Susanna sat in her office that evening, sipping tea as her team sent her live updates. She didn't feel joy. Not yet. She felt the weight of justice, heavy, deliberate, necessary. But she wasn't done. She bought stock in one of RevFit's suppliers, a struggling apparel manufacturer that provided branded merchandise for the company. Quietly, through intermediaries, she gained influence on the board. When the next order from RevFit came in, she had it delayed under the guise of supply chain issues. Andrew's company missed its promised shipment dates, and customers erupted. Then came the event invitations. Susanna hosted an empowerment weekend under Phoenix Rise, inviting a carefully curated list of influencers, wellness coaches, therapists, and businesswomen. Among the invitees was Chloe, the same woman Andrew had left her for. Susanna didn't invite her directly. She simply placed the event where she knew Chloe would see it. Sure enough, a few days later, Chloe's Instagram stories showed her preparing for a transformational retreat, hosted by a powerhouse brand run by a woman who inspires the hell out of me. Susanna watched with detached curiosity. The weekend was a success with viral footage, testimonials, and high engagement. Chloe even posted a selfie with Susanna, unaware of their shared history. It made headlines across wellness media circuits, new faces of healing and power. Andrew saw it. Susanna knew he did. He called her 3 days later. Her phone buzzed while she was in a meeting. She glanced at the screen. A name she hadn't seen in over a year. Andrew Warren. She let it ring. When it buzzed again, this time with a voicemail, she listened. His voice was strained, a brittle imitation of the man who once looked down at her with indifference. He said he wanted to talk, that things had gone sideways, that he didn't know who else to turn to. She deleted the message. The next week, she got word from Naomi that Andrew had requested a meeting with Castell, hoping to form a strategic alliance. Castell declined, politely but firmly. Susanna didn't speak of it. She didn't gloat. She kept building. She hired a branding agency to develop a visual rehaul for Phoenix Rise. The logo, once a delicate flame, was now a roaring firebird. She commissioned artwork from survivors. Her website's banner now read, "We don't bounce back, we rise." Months passed. RevFit's valuation dropped. Internal chaos was now external scandal. Andrew was in damage control, issuing public statements about reevaluating leadership culture and renewed commitments to community. But no one was listening anymore. He had lost the story, and Susanna owned it. The hunt wasn't about the chase anymore. It was about the kill, not literal, but symbolic. The death of his illusion of power, the eradication of his control, the final reversal of roles. But Susanna wasn't done yet. She had one more move, and for that she would need to meet him face to face. Not as the woman he once shamed, but as the woman he could never touch again. The lobby of the high-rise office was cool and immaculate, its marble floors gleaming under the soft wash of recessed lighting. Susanna stood still as the elevator doors slid open before her, the quiet chime echoing against the walls like the beginning of a requiem. Dressed in a slate-gray fitted suit, her heels clicking with composed authority, she stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the 42nd floor. The numbers ascended slowly, and so did her breath. Deep, steady, unshaken. She had not come for reconciliation. She had come for the moment she'd imagined in 100 different forms, the moment when he would see her and understand just how completely the roles had reversed. Andrew's company, once buzzing with energy and aspirational flair, now carried the air of something decaying from the inside. The receptionist barely looked up as Susanna gave her name, her voice clipped and professional. She was led down a hallway she had never walked before, but somehow had already conquered. She paused at the glass doors at the end of the corridor where her name had already shaken the foundations behind them. Inside the boardroom, Andrew stood with his back to the door, his arms resting on the table as if they alone could hold him up. When he turned, his face betrayed the exhaustion that no carefully tailored suit could conceal. The man who had once told her she didn't belong beside him now looked smaller, faded, the gleam of self-assurance long since dulled. He froze the moment he saw her. His eyes widened, disbelief flickering across his features like a man seeing a ghost. Susanna did not offer a smile. She did not extend a hand. She simply took her seat across from him, her movements economical, unhurried, sovereign. "You asked to see me," she said calmly, folding one leg over the other. Andrew opened his mouth, then hesitated, as if his throat no longer remembered how to speak with authority. When the words came, they were cautious, uncertain. "I didn't know who else to talk to." A beat passed. Susanna raised an eyebrow, unmoved. "You've built something powerful," he added, his tone deferential. "Phoenix Rise is everywhere." She nodded once, acknowledging the obvious. Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't awkward. It was weighty, his shame against her serenity. "I need help," he said finally. "RevFit is floundering." "I know," Susanna replied. He swallowed. "I've been trying to keep it afloat. I've lost 2 investors. Our tech team is under-resourced, and the media, after that article, everything shifted." "You mean the article that highlighted the way your company exploited its employees while pretending to empower women?" Her voice remained level, but her eyes pierced. He looked away. I didn't know it was that bad. Things got out of control. No, Susanna said sharply. You let them get out of control, the same way you let everything else rot when it no longer served you. His eyes met hers again, a flash of guilt bleeding into them. You're right. I didn't treat you the way you deserved. I was selfish, cruel. I thought success meant needing to look a certain way, to be seen with a certain type of person. And I didn't fit that image anymore, she finished for him. Andrew nodded slowly, shame plain on his face. I see that now. I'm not here for an apology, she said. You'll have to live with your own conscience. But I will say this. Every time you diminished me, every time you made me feel like less, I rebuilt myself into someone who could burn everything you built to the ground. He was quiet for a long moment. I want to offer a partnership, he said hesitantly. RevFit still has reach. With your audience and my infrastructure, we could... She laughed, a low, sharp sound. You think I need you? She asked, tilting her head. Andrew, your reach is a puddle compared to the ocean I've built. I don't need to partner with you. I own your clients now. Your audience moved on. They found someone who speaks to them with truth, not marketing jargon and polished abs. He leaned back, his jaw tightening. Then why did you come? Because I wanted you to see, she said. Not just the new me, but the version of yourself that you've tried to ignore. The man who threw away the best thing that ever happened to him because he couldn't see past her dress size. Andrew stood up, pacing slightly. So, this is revenge. No, Susanna said, rising slowly to her feet. This is reality. Yours is shrinking, mine is rising, and you get to watch every step of the way. He exhaled shakily. I don't know what to do anymore. You learn, she said. You take accountability. You start from nothing, like I did. Except now, you'll have to do it without my loyalty, without my belief in you. You burned that bridge yourself. She walked to the door, but stopped just before opening it. Do you know the irony? She asked, looking over her shoulder. Andrew stared at her, hollow. I used to pray you would see me again, that one day I'd become someone you'd want back. But now I realize I outgrew you so completely, I couldn't fit back into your world even if I tried. She left him there alone in the sterile conference room, surrounded by charts and graphs and fading visions of influence. Back in her own office, Susanna didn't speak of the meeting to anyone. Not Paul, not Naomi, not her team. She didn't need to. It was done. The next few weeks unfolded as if the universe itself had acknowledged the shift in power. RevFit failed to meet its quarterly goals. A whistleblower surfaced, citing years of internal misconduct. Andrew was asked to step down by what remained of his board. Chloe disappeared from his social media, her silence louder than any statement. And then the final blow came. A prominent media outlet published a feature titled The Rise of Susanna Lane, From Rejection to Reign. Her photo graced the front page, powerful, poised, and radiant. The article detailed her journey from betrayal to business icon, from discarded wife to industry leader. It mentioned Andrew only once, in passing, as the now-defunct founder of RevFit. The comment section overflowed with praise. Women called her a hero, a mirror, a guide. Some admitted that they had stayed in relationships too long, believing they were lucky to be tolerated. Now they said they were walking away. And Andrew? He watched it all from the sidelines, his inbox quiet, his name slowly slipping from relevance. Susanna, meanwhile, didn't stop. She opened a second headquarters in Atlanta, launched a line of apparel designed by formerly incarcerated women, and announced a new mentorship program for survivors of emotional abuse. She stood on stage at conference after conference, sharing her story not for pity, but for power. One night, standing in her private studio, she looked up at the vision board she had created 2 years ago. It was covered now with check marks, crossed-out fears, and new, audacious goals. In the corner, still pinned like a relic, was a photo of her former self, round-faced, teary-eyed, clutching a suitcase outside a motel. She didn't remove it. She needed to remember, because the woman in that photo didn't just survive. She started the fire. The morning after the article was published, Susanna arrived at her office earlier than usual. The air was thick with the scent of roasted beans from the cafe downstairs, and the sunlight had barely touched the tops of the high-rises surrounding the Phoenix Rise headquarters. Inside the glass-walled boardroom on the 15th floor, her team had already begun assembling. Naomi, in tailored black, her eyes sharp as ever. Camila, head of content, sipping coffee and scrolling through the overnight analytics. 2 new interns, fresh-faced and eager, barely managing to contain their awe as they watched the numbers climb on the main screen. The impact of the media feature was immediate and staggering. Over 75,000 new followers across platforms. A 5-fold increase in product sales. Requests from speaking bureaus, universities, and global organizations flooded their inbox. But Susanna, though calm and gracious, felt no shock. She had seen this coming. She had orchestrated every step like a conductor preparing the final crescendo of a long, deliberate symphony. She didn't mention Andrew that morning, but his name didn't need to be spoken. Everyone knew what the feature implied. The story had been clear. The man who left her behind was now irrelevant, and she, unstoppable. But she wasn't done. There was one more note to strike, one final chord to play before the curtain fell on the empire he had built. Late that afternoon, as the team settled into their post-launch routines, Naomi stepped into Susanna's office with a peculiar smile on her face and a manila envelope in hand. "You'll want to see this," she said, setting the envelope on the desk. Susanna opened it with careful fingers. Inside were printouts, legal correspondence, financial documents, and a single memo, a formal acquisition proposal. RevFit was on the brink. Andrew, in a final act of desperation, had agreed to a last-ditch merger offer from a lesser-known wellness company known for mimicking trends instead of creating them. But the buyer had conditions. They wanted stability, credibility, a new image. The catch? They had reached out to Susanna. "They're offering controlling interest to Phoenix Rise," Naomi said with a small, satisfied nod. "They want you to take over operations, clean it up, restructure, save what's left." Susanna leaned back in her chair, the paper between her fingers light as ash. She didn't smile. She didn't speak for a moment. Then she set the memo down and exhaled slowly, thoughtfully. Set the meeting. When she walked into the old RevFit building a week later, everything had changed. Her team accompanied her, not just Naomi, but the heads of each Phoenix Rise department. They wore confidence like armor, dressed in sleek silhouettes and bright eyes. Andrew, by contrast, waited in the same boardroom she'd once entered months ago. This time he stood before a fractured team, many of whom she recognized from earlier leak reports. They looked anxious, exhausted, and uncertain. Some straightened up when they saw her enter. Others looked down, ashamed or afraid. Andrew's face betrayed nothing at first. He wore a mask of neutrality, as if clinging to the last tattered edges of pride. He extended a hand when she approached, but Susanna only met his gaze. Then she looked at the empty chair at the head of the table and took it without hesitation. "This is how it will work," she said, opening the folder in front of her. "Phoenix Rise will assume full operational oversight. Departments will be evaluated and either merged or dissolved. Senior leadership will be restructured. Any employee involved in the prior culture of harassment, manipulation, or unethical practice will be terminated immediately." A ripple of murmurs moved around the room. Andrew shifted in his seat, but remained silent. "Any questions?" There were none. The next week unfolded like the careful unspooling of silk thread. Susanna's executive team implemented sweeping reforms. Policies changed, trainings were held, surveys circulated, gathering anonymous feedback on everything from work culture to compensation. And Andrew? He was reassigned, given a role far below his former station. On paper, he became a consultant under the mentorship of the brand integration team. In practice, he reported to a mid-level manager who answered to Naomi. For the first time in his professional life, Andrew sat at the bottom of the pyramid, and every week, like clockwork, he was required to submit reports that passed through multiple levels before arriving, inevitably, on Susanna's desk. The irony was brutal and perfect. The man who once said she didn't fit in his world now labored in a world she built, beneath a structure she ruled. The humiliation wasn't public, but it was total. Colleagues who once admired him now whispered behind his back. Some avoided his gaze in elevators. Others smiled too politely, the kind of smile that cloaked pity and professionalism. But Susanna never gloated. She didn't visit his office, didn't summon him for unnecessary meetings, didn't correct him in front of others. She let the system speak for her. Every email he sent was a reminder. Every checklist he completed, every correction he received, every missed target followed by a meeting with someone who once would never have dared raise their voice to him. Those were her retributions. 2 months passed before he asked to speak with her again. She allowed the meeting, scheduled for 10 minutes at the end of a busy Friday. When he entered her office, he looked thinner. His once carefully gelled hair was looser, his suit wrinkled at the collar. But it was his expression that told the whole story, pride hollowed out by consequence. "Thank you for seeing me," he said, his voice low. Susanna motioned to the chair across from her desk, but said nothing. He sat, cleared his throat, looked at his hands. "I know this isn't what you want to hear, and I know I don't have the right to ask anything of you, but I wanted to say that I understand now." She raised an eyebrow. "Understand what?" "What I did, who I became, what I lost." He looked up, his eyes glassy. "You didn't deserve any of it. I was weak, afraid, obsessed with image, and I hated myself for it, so I made you the problem." Susanna listened. She didn't interrupt, but her face gave nothing away. "I guess I hoped that if I worked hard enough here, maybe I could show you that I'm not that man anymore." Silence stretched between them. Then she said calmly, "You're not. But not because you changed, because you lost everything." He flinched. "That man," she continued, "would never sit in a chair like this, would never submit reports to someone he once humiliated, would never apologize. He only valued the world when he sat on top of it. But now that it's turned, you suddenly want redemption." "I do," he said quietly, "but I don't expect it. I just wanted you to know." She nodded once. "Then you can go." He stood but paused at the door. "You built something incredible, Susanna. You're extraordinary." She looked up at him, her expression finally shifting. "No," she said, "I always was. You just refused to see it." He left with his head low. That night, alone in her penthouse suite, Susanna stood on the balcony overlooking the city. The lights stretched endlessly in every direction, a constellation of windows and possibility. She remembered standing on a similar balcony in a shelter, watching dawn break and wondering if she would ever feel whole again. Now, she wasn't just whole, she was towering. The final piece of her plan, humbling Andrew not through vengeance but through consequence, was complete. He worked beneath her, answered to her, lived in a world shaped by her decisions, and even his apology, however sincere, could not rewrite the past. It only underscored what he had lost. In the office building he once owned, his name was no longer on the wall. Hers was etched in steel, and it would remain there long after he was gone. The lawsuit arrived on Andrew's desk like a final nail in the coffin. Neatly packaged, signed, and stamped, the company seal cold and official in the upper right-hand corner. He knew what it meant before he even opened the envelope. For weeks, the whispers had been growing louder, the tension in every meeting crackling like dry leaves underfoot. He had seen the writing on the wall, the deadlines he had missed, the discrepancies in the accounts, the suppliers left unpaid, the investors who stopped returning calls. The woman he once discarded now held all the leverage, and there was no maneuver, no angle, no lie left to save him. He read the first page twice, and when he reached the final paragraph, the part that laid out the demand for full repayment of the misused funds and return of assets, he let the papers fall onto his desk. His hand trembled. He wiped at his face, then stared at the floor for a long, silent minute. When he stood up, the office spun. He didn't tell anyone he was leaving. He just walked out, past the glass doors of the company he no longer controlled, past the reception desk where no one lifted their eyes to acknowledge him, past the front steps where once, not long ago, a photographer had snapped a photo of him grinning in front of a banner that read, "Welcome to the future of wellness." Now, that future belonged to someone else. The cab ride to Susanna's building was long and suffocating. He stared out the window, the city streets blurring into gray streaks. His phone buzzed with messages he ignored. His lawyers had advised him not to approach her. "Let the legal team handle it," they said. "You'll only make it worse." But Andrew wasn't thinking like a businessman anymore. He wasn't thinking like a strategist or a founder. He was thinking like a man unraveling, desperate to stop the collapse of the last few pieces holding him together. Susanna's office was on the top floor of a modern tower in the heart of the city. He had never been there before. He'd only seen photos online, images of her in interviews, standing beside influential women, smiling behind podiums, hands raised mid-speech, a woman in total command of her destiny. He had never imagined that one day he would walk through those doors not as a guest, not even as a visitor, but as a man begging for mercy from the person he had once tossed aside. The receptionist recognized him instantly. Her lips tightened. Still, she picked up the phone and called upstairs. After a few seconds, she looked at him and said, "She'll see you." He waited in the reception lounge, perched on the edge of a leather chair, his hands clasped so tightly they turned pale. When the elevator doors opened and Naomi stepped out, her expression unreadable, she motioned for him to follow. Susanna's office was unlike any space he'd ever entered. It wasn't grand in the traditional sense, no gold, no ostentatious decor, but it radiated calm power. The walls were covered in artwork created by survivors, bold brushstrokes, faces rising from shadows, wings in shades of crimson and cobalt. One wall displayed the original Phoenix Rise logo, alongside the newer version etched in bronze. The shelves held books on business, healing, activism, and resilience. Her desk, wide and organized, stood before a panoramic window that framed the skyline like a living painting. She was standing when he entered, facing the window, her back to him. "I was wondering how long it would take," she said, not turning. Andrew's voice came out thinner than he intended. "Susanna, please. I'm not here to argue." She turned slowly, arms folded. "I received the documents," he said, reaching into his coat pocket. "I understand what they mean. He faltered. "I don't have the money." "I know," she replied. "I've tried everything. My assets are tied up, investors are gone. Chloe left. I can't even make the next payroll. If this suit moves forward, I'll lose everything. My home, my reputation, my name." Susanna walked to her desk and sat down. "You already lost your name," she said. "It just took you this long to notice." Andrew crossed the room but stopped a few feet from her desk, unable to bring himself closer. "I made mistakes," he said. "Terrible ones. And I don't expect forgiveness, but I'm begging you, don't destroy me." Her gaze was steady, her posture relaxed. "You destroyed yourself." He dropped into the chair across from her, his hands covering his face. "I don't know what else to do." "You survive," she said, "like I did. You find a way to live with the consequences of your choices. You rebuild if you have the courage. I don't have what you have." "No," she agreed, "you don't. Because I built it from pain, from being humiliated, abandoned, discarded. You built your empire by standing on the backs of people who believed in you. You stepped on loyalty. You crushed devotion. You treated love like a transaction. And now you're bankrupt in every way." Andrew looked up at her, his eyes wet. "I'm sorry." She studied him. "You're sorry now because you're losing, not because you were wrong." "That's not true," he whispered. She leaned back, silent for a long time. Then, slowly, she opened the drawer of her desk and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "I'm giving you a choice," she said. "Sign this document, admitting full liability for the project failure and transferring your remaining shares to Phoenix Rise, and I'll drop the personal asset seizure." Andrew stared at it. "That means I walk away with nothing." She nodded. "Correct, but you'll walk away." His hands shook as he took the paper. He scanned it once, then again, and then, with a pen she slid across the desk, he signed. Susanna took the document, placed it into a folder, and set it aside. "Thank you," he said, standing slowly. She rose as well. "I don't expect anything from you," he added, "but for what it's worth, I'm glad you became everything I was too blind to see." She didn't respond. He turned and walked to the door. Just as his hand touched the handle, he paused. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked without turning. "The past, the way we were?" She inhaled, then answered quietly. "I miss the version of myself who believed you'd never hurt me, but she's gone, and I'm not mourning her anymore." He nodded once, then left. In the days that followed, news of the formal transfer of RevFit's remaining shares made headlines in industry circles. The media framed it as a graceful exit, a merger of necessity. But insiders knew the truth. Andrew had lost not to a competitor, but to the very woman he once discarded. It wasn't just a business acquisition, it was a reckoning. Meanwhile, Susanna flourished. Phoenix Rise launched a new global initiative focused on mentorship for women entrepreneurs from underserved communities. She was invited to speak at international summits. Her face graced magazine covers. Awards followed: Impact, innovation, leadership. But more than the accolades, it was the letters that mattered. Every day, her inbox overflowed with messages from women across the world. One said, "You saved me." Another, "You made me brave." And one, handwritten, simply read, "Thank you for becoming who I needed to believe I still could." On the evening of her wedding to a man who had stood by her through it all, not a CEO or a model, but a quiet architect with kind eyes and fierce devotion, Susanna stood in front of her mirror wearing a white gown that clung to her body like light. Her friends buzzed around her, laughing and crying, but she barely heard them. Her reflection held her. The girl who had once begged for scraps of love was no more. She was a woman now, a queen, an empire, and the only weight she carried was her crown. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe for more just like it. Don't forget to check out our other videos, and share this one with someone who needs to see it.